Good evening. Good evening and welcome very, very much, where I'm very pleased to welcome to the program Chaim Freimann. And Mr. Freimann is a representative of an extremely interesting organization called Neturei Karta, which I am here to learn a great deal about and hopefully be able to have the people in the audience learn a great deal, not only about the unique position in a certain sense of the Neturei Karta, but also in what I hope is not too naive a sense, many of the Judaic traditions which I am ignorant of and we're going to be learning, and Chaim, welcome very, very much to Conversations. I wonder if you might. You're obviously of the Orthodox persuasion as far as the Jewish tradition is concerned. I wonder maybe the best place for us to begin, since you are a spokesman of Neturei Karta, is to share with the audience Neturei Karta as a frame of mind or a way of thinking, and from that perspective perhaps we could get some other thoughts that we could discuss broader, perhaps Jewish issues and so forth. But Neturei Karta, what is that, and it's a frame of mind, or perhaps you could share with us?
Neturei Karta is a name which translates as guardians of the city. It has a name which has been coined to denote vehement and unyielding opposition to Zionism. It is not a sect. It is representative of authentic, genuine Judaism, which has never accepted and never compromised with Zionism. They reject it totally. In order to distinguish themselves from other Jews who unfortunately have been duped and bamboozled and taken in by this big lie, so they've coined and identified themselves as Neturei Karta. This is from a passage in the Medrash.
The Medrash?
The Medrash is a rabbinical source of law. I mean, that's where the words are taken from.
Is that part of the Torah or the Talmud?
This is part of the oral tradition, the Talmud.
I see.
The oral law.
And that term Neturei Karta occurs in there?
The words Neturei Karta appear there.
And it's part of, it tends to be, the people who tend to be associated with the Neturei Karta tend to be, well, they would be almost by definition, in a certain sense, Orthodox in their Judaism, as it were. They're the authentic, bona fide Jewish people, in your view.
Unfortunately,
it's confusing to some of us, because...
Unfortunately, there are many observant Jews, strictly observant, who have been taken in by Zionism and have compromised their idealism and surrendered their dignity and accepted to some extent Zionism, even though they are observant Jews. The words Neturei Karta denote those Orthodox, devout Jews who have not accepted, who have rejected in totality Zionism in all its ramifications.
I see. In a sense, it grew out of a reaction to the Zionist movement that began to emerge in the 19th century. Right?
Exactly. These are regular, plain Jews who are believing and observant of all the precepts, but in order to demonstrate their opposition, to emphasize to what extent they are opposed to Zionism as masquerading as Judaism, they identify themselves as Neturei Karta.
I see, right. And okay, it's interesting because, so in the 19th century, maybe we could go back and do some of the history if we could there, in a sense, because the concept of Zionism in the modern expression, Herzl and so forth, had announced that. And when the concept was announced by Herzl, that there should begin to be thought among the, if I'm incorrect, correct me in this analysis, there should begun to be thought among the Jewish peoples who were in dispersal the idea of reestablishment of the state of Israel, a call to the Jewish people to return to Israel and so forth. The reaction of the rabbis, the reaction of the mass of the people in the Jewish community was a rejection of that general proposition when first it was announced, as I understand. Back, let's say, even in the idea was being formulated 19th century and leading into the 20th century.
Herzl was a totally assimilated Jew, alien to all Jewish concepts. He concocted a movement to detach the Jewish people from the countries where they had emigrated, where they lived throughout the world, and bring them to Palestine and disinherit, displace, and dispossess the indigenous native population there. When this movement first made its appearance, it was opposed by all rabbis, by all sages, by all religious thinking Jews.
Why? Why was it opposed, sir?
Now, you're asking, why is Zionism such a pernicious atheism? Why it is a blasphemy? Why it is diametrically opposed to every legacy, every value, every concept that Judaism stands for? That's what you're asking?
Well, I guess it is. In a sense, that's what I'm asking.
That's what I will try to explain.
Please.
The Jewish people recognize that the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, the temple in Jerusalem, and the subsequent dispersion of the Jewish people throughout the world in exile was an act of God, a divine decree, V'pnei chato'enu golinu me'artzenu, which translates as, because of our sins, we were sent into exile. It wasn't because the Roman phalanx was more adept and more skilled, or the Babylonians were more victorious, more powerful. It was ordained that the Jewish people did not merit to remain in the land of Israel with the Beis Hamikdash under the circumstances that they had enjoyed up until then. So this was a divine decree, this destruction and this whole catastrophe. As a consequence, the Jewish people were dispersed throughout the world, and the prophet Jeremiah specifically instructs them, it's brought down in chapter 29 in the book of Jeremiah, that wherever they happened to be led, at that time it was Babylonia, they should build houses, build homes, get married, plant vineyards, and become integrated into the economy of the land and seek the welfare and peace of the country which has given them residence. That, up until now, has been the attitude, the direction, the understanding of the Jewish people. In whatever land they happen to live and to have emigrated, whether it is America or a country in Europe or in the Middle East or in North Africa, they have established their homes and established livelihoods and have maintained themselves as patriotic, loyal, law-abiding citizens who loved the princes and governments of the land where they lived and sought to increase its success, its welfare, and its hatzlacha.
It's hatzlacha.
Hatzlacha is the Jewish word for furthering the attentions and the welfare and the success of the undertaking.
So through the long history, they were in diaspora by divine decree, deliberately.
This is a divine decree that they be dispersed and live amongst the Gentiles, the non-Jews. They, of course, must maintain their religion, their identity.
Yes, right.
Observe the precepts of the Torah,
which they did for 2,000
years. Which they maintained strictly. And their longing for a salvation, a redemption, a return to the land of Israel was only to be on spiritual terms, meaning to hope and to wish and to pray and to better themselves through repentance, introspection, and improvement of their religious lives.
And that they were in such diaspora was a divine decree can be pointed to by the writings of the Torah and the Talmud and the study of the ancient traditions and so forth, that they were meant to be in this way and that they were disallowed from having their own state.
They're forbidden to pick themselves up, to lift themselves up, and to seek to make their own salvation through man-made efforts. They must not terminate the divine scheme of exile through their own means. But they have to live in daily expectation of the coming of Mashiach, which is translated as the Messiah, which will be a spiritual experience in which the whole world will recognize the Creator, and this will usher in a new era of universal peace, and every creature will be judged in the final judgment. But a materialistic,
Yes.
political, nationalistic, military undertaking to deliberately remove the Jews from their integration amongst the Gentile nations and bring them up en masse to Palestine and to conquer the land and
With force of arms.
With force of arms and to disinherit and dehumanize the non-Jewish inhabitants there and say, we're taking over. We want to establish an independent political entity, and with military means if necessary, it is our land. And if they bring proofs from Abraham and from the Bible, this is misquoting. This is what is called Megala Panim B'Torah Shelo K'Halacha. To use the verses of the Bible not in accordance with halacha, with the reality of Jewish law. I mean, our yearning, our waiting is purely spiritual. And up until that time, we must maintain good relations with the Goyim, with the Gentiles, with the nations of the world, and not do anything to antagonize them, and not do anything to upset the status quo.
To upset the status quo, as difficult as the status quo might be, as difficult as the status quo might seem.
Even
people
when the
would
Jewish
say we have suffered pogrom, we have suffered so tremendously at the hands often of the Gentiles. We have suffered so, and even at the hands of that suffering, they must have suffered this suffering, as it were, until Mashiach.
Well, you know, up until Herzl's movement, I mean, the Jewish people have always suffered persecution, expulsion, and various decrees which discriminated against them, which sought to impoverish them and deprive them of human rights. But they never used that as an excuse, if you will examine history, to overthrow the government, to overthrow the kingdom, to make a rebellion, and to say that we want to be independent of Gentile rule. They prayed to God whenever they were in danger. They used intercession through agents to annul decrees. They used bribery. They used means like under the table to have laws annulled which discriminated against Jews. And if it came to expulsion, so they went to a different land which opened up their doors. But it is forbidden to make war, rebellion, to overthrow Gentile rule, Gentile authority.
And it seems particularly forbidden for people to sally out and to move toward Jerusalem and Palestine and to establish a state prior to the patient waiting of the appropriate time in the unfolding of the divine scheme.
Up until now,
and that is a heresy of the worst order.
Of the worst order, because it transforms Judaism.
Yes, it does.
It puts it in a whole different light. It substitutes the concept that we are a divine people for one of nationalism, of simply making a revolutionary war, throwing off the yoke of imperialism, and becoming independent just like the other nations of the world.
With armies and muscle and strength.
That's right. This is tantamount to an atheism, a heresy of the worst order.
And nationalism in a certain sense. And in a certain sense it would be, in the view of this, and again we like to, it's interesting that all nations are able to have their state, or they're able to have this, except the Jews. Only the Jews were not able to have their own state.
We were sent into exile by divine decree, and we are to wait patiently for the time when the Mashiach will come, and Messiah will come. This is one of the basic fundamentals of our belief. I mean, without this firm belief, the integrity of the Jew is very much diminished.
When Zionism was first announced, virtually all rabbis were in opposition to this.
Everybody. I want
in
to point
this
out.
traditional vein, right?
Yes, I want
and
to
you
point
still
out.
hold on to that traditional vein.
I want to point out that up until the appearance of Zionism and the influx of the Chalutzim, the nationalistic settlers who came with a whole different intention of usurping authority and evicting the Palestinian Arab population, Up until then, there had always been a trickling of individual Jews from the diaspora.
Some scholars, maybe, or something.
People who came to be buried there, or people who came to sanctify their lives, who sought spiritual elevation. But their motives were totally devoid of political ambition to establish a political authority, to rule the land, to set up an entity which would be parallel to a nation.
Yeah, right.
It was purely religious and spiritual to the full end, and they were always tolerated by the non-Jewish population there, because the non-Jewish population there, up until the appearance of Zionism, recognized that the Jew was not a threat.
Right, okay. It wasn't a threat.
Was not a threat.
And
we lived in good neighborly relationship with the Arabs up until the Zionists came and became aggressive and colonial and fascist and created a terrible hatred, which we don't see the end of.
They lived in better relationship historically with, in many cases, the Arab than they did with some of the European.
Definitely.
There was less persecution.
It was in
among
Christian
the Arabs,
Europe. It was in Christian Europe that the Jews suffered massacres during the times of the Crusades, and the Black Death plague, and the Rheinfleisch massacres, and the desecration of the host libels and the blood libels. The Jews were constantly victimized and suffering pogroms and massacres in Europe.
But among the Arabs, they were living
relatively.
More or less at peace.
They lived much. They were much better off. And especially in Palestine, the Jews were much better off than the Jews were in other Arab lands. Interesting to note that the Jews got along with the Arabs much better in Palestine than the Jews got along with the Arabs in other countries like Yemen, Iraq, and Syria.
It is interesting, isn't it?
It
would be this sense of universality in a certain
but compared
sense.
To Christian Europe, what they fared much better off in Oriental countries.
And in a certain sense, the messianic vision of the Judaic tradition, which is a rich and absolutely core to the whole of the monotheistic world in a very real sense. It's the core to that, could be seen in a certain sense as a non-threatening vision, in that it sees it necessarily as being accompanying an era of, and only an era of universal peace before this could occur.
Correct.
So it is unthreatening
It is
vision.
unthreatening. And this has been undermined by Zionism.
Well, okay.
Zionism has created a very threatening situation. It has encouraged anti-Semitism. It has made the Jewish people constantly the spotlight of the world. Every day the Mideast is in the news.
Yes, very dangerous. The most
very
dangerous area in the
dangerous.
world.
For our security, for the security of the Jewish people, for the maintenance of their peace and well-being, this is a tremendous danger. And therefore it is necessary for the Neturei Karta to advertise, to make known, for me to come to appear on television, which is a tremendous innovation.
Yes, right.
I mean, Orthodox Jewish people don't have a television in their houses.
I see. Oh, really?
Let alone appear on a television program.
I'm very pleased you've been able to do that. Yeah.
But this is only because of the tremendous danger and the threat
of the moment
to the existence of the Jewish people, and the tremendous desecration of God's name, which has gone forth in the world because of Zionist propaganda and Zionist deceit and their lies, their big lies.
And that's important for us to
that we have to counter that movement and their efforts by doing things like this, by appearing on television.
Yes, okay, and it's important to remind the audience here that we're speaking now in this vein from the core, as it were, in a certain sense, of traditional, kosher, Judaic, Orthodox tradition, and that you, in a certain say, that this position is a bona fide Jewish position, and that there has been ersatz.
That's right. We have never changed. The whole world has changed. The whole world is compromised. Unfortunately, some Jewish people feel that they have to fight Zionism from within, so they've made political parties and joined the Zionist parliament, but actually they have
Yeah.
They have consented to the whole monstrosity.
Let's back up a little bit to the beginning of Zionism and the fact that when it was first enunciated, it was a radical heresy and seen as such by virtually all the rabbis in the world,
Correct.
all the Jewish people in the world.
Correct.
What happened to change that reality? That so many of the people who now, even here in the great city of New York City, Jewish people would fervently be in support of the Zionist state of Israel and their Jewish people. How did we get from a point from where universally the Jewish people rejected the idea with the rabbinical leadership and so forth, to the point where the Jewish people in the vast majority in New York and around the world, not to mention in Israel itself, with much of the rabbinical leadership, with much of the rabbis, Reform, Conservative, and so forth, how did we get from that point to the point where we are today?
After the appearance of non-religious Zionism, there came a time when Herzl realized that he would not be able to dupe all the Jewish people if his movement was devoid of Jewish ritual. And they started to form a religious Zionist group called the Mizrahi. Mizrahi. Now, the scriptures and the Talmud are replete with phrases referring to love of Eretz Yisroel, love of Yerushalayim. And the merit...
Yerushalayim, what is it?
Yerushalayim is Jerusalem.
Jerusalem, I'm sorry. Yeah, okay.
And the merit and the tremendous privilege of living there and breathing the air and being part of the scenario of the Holy Land, that they use these phrases, these terminologies, and which every Jew says in his daily prayers also, where he actually prays for the eventual salvation, redemption of the Jewish people and the whole world, the coming of Mashiach. They use these terminologies in order to sell Zionism. And it's very easy. There was a time
how could they sell Zionism, if I may, how could they sell Zionism and the going to Israel if in the Jewish tradition this was only to occur after the coming of Moshiach? Moshiach has not come.
Right.
How could they make this basic distinction?
Because
how do they get over or around that?
There has
basic
always
idea?
been this love of Jerusalem, love of Israel, of the land, and Jewish people say in their prayers that they wait for the divine revelation, the divine appearance once again when the Beis Hamikdash will be rebuilt through divine intervention. That when eventually they saw the seeming success of a movement which began to realize, people who were very, very limited in their scope began to be swayed. And of course they were...
Because it's very...
That's
the nectar.
Right.
It's
right.
so
exactly.
desired. And it's a temptation.
That's right. And when they harped upon the pogroms and the sufferings in Europe,
well,
as
there
being
were.
an excuse, there were, and they've
terrible pogroms.
There've always been
and
persecutions. There've always been persecutions of Jewish people, and these false leaders rose up, and where we look at this whole experience of Zionism as being another manifestation of a false messianic movement.
Oh, that's
there
a serious
have been
charge.
a series of false
An
messianic
antichrist,
movements, if you are familiar with history.
Yeah.
This is, well, we think of the last and the worst, the most all-encompassing, heretical, atheistic, false messianic movement, which has, with the progression of history, schlepped along, swept along the masses.
And it's because of, and in the process of that, has it been necessary for, in your view, I suppose it is true to say, that sacred traditions and clear understandings of what Scripture and divine guidance would tell us have had to be set aside in order to justify this nationalistic development. Those things had to have been put aside. It cannot be by rabbinical or scholarly interpretation of certain things that are said, made so that it could be understood that this is really the thing that is divinely decreed, that Israel be established by force of arms?
It cannot be reconciled.
Cannot be.
It cannot be reconciled. Of course, there are always people who will falsify, make spurious claims, and find isolated, unclear passages which will reflect that you can make a man-made effort. For instance, the Jewish people are sworn by three very solemn oaths. These are mentioned in the Talmud, that they will not terminate the exile, they will not take back before Mashiach, take back and in any way expedite the process, accelerate the process of redemption through their man-made efforts. And later on, the false philosophers have come and said that these oaths are not valid anymore, they were only up to a certain time. And there was one oath mentioned also in the Talmud, that the Gentiles would not persecute the Jewish people too much. So there are those that want to come and say, since the Gentiles did not keep their oath, we don't have to keep our oath. I'm just giving you an example of how things have been distorted.
So there has been rabbinical differentiation.
This is not rabbinical. These are people who want to mislead. They find reasons and excuses to mislead.
Well, they've been misleading in a way, but they would probably feel that they are on the right course, and they would think that you just haven't caught up with history or something.
Every false messianic movement has resorted to verses of scripture and Talmud and turn things over topsy-turvy. The Neturei Karta is following the traditional path and attitude which has never been altered, never changed.
Never has changed from the beginning.
That's right. This is the attitude
Orthodox
always.
There. And you must be a thorn in the side of many of the people, because as it was very unpopular when first announced, it now has among the Jewish people of the world, I don't know how many we have that are identified as Jews, 18, 20 million people who would be identified in the world as Jewish people or so. A great number or a high percentage of those people would be in wholehearted support of doing all that we possibly can to undergird and support currently the state of Israel. Wouldn't you agree that that is the case?
Yes, we are like those few, that remnant who refuses to bow down to the golden calf. Regardless of all the so-called miracles and supernatural evidences and proofs that the Zionist movement is God-sponsored and endorsed by God and protected by God, we refuse to recognize its validity, and we reject it in all its ways.
And have just consistently held on to that traditional belief that others you feel have fallen away from for expediency.
It has been successful, and it has raised up a state. I mean, Herzl's dream has been realized.
Yes, indeed.
And the state has been able to maintain itself in wars.
Yes.
And it has the reputation of having one of the most superior and sophisticated military apparatuses in the entire world.
Absolutely.
And its intelligence force is maybe third or second to the CIA and the KGB.
Yes, right.
The Mossad.
And for a people who have been persecuted
and
for so many years, that power is a sense of great nectar, right?
This is a very tremendous, a very big challenge. This is a test, a trial, a tribulation. Before Hashem, right before God sends the true Messiah, the true Mashiach, and we reach the fulfillment of the entire creation, we are tested to the limit with a false ersatz and a substitution to see whether we will maintain our dignity, maintain our principles, or else be buffeted with the times.
And you feel that is the role that Neturei Karta still continues to play, and it is necessary for you to speak out even now, as you put it, in these desperate times, in a certain sense, vehemently against what you feel is a ersatz and antichrist-like kind of ersatz, false messianic Zionist entity.
And even to use the means of mass media, television, ads in the New York Times, we must use every desperate means in order to proclaim to the world that the Zionists and Zionism do not represent authentic, genuine, bona fide Judaism, and the crimes against humanity that they are committing against the poor Palestinians are not based on religion. The Bible is not their mandate, as one of their leaders once.
No, they're secular.
As one of their secular leaders once hypocritically proclaimed in public, that the Bible is their mandate. And he himself was an irreligious, atheistic Jew, and It's necessary to convey this message
All
through
right.
every means possible.
We have a film clip. In May, May, I think it was 15th, the anniversary of the establishment of Israel, there was a demonstration here in New York City at the UN that Neturei Karta, yourself, and others participated in. There's some footage from that we think maybe might do well to be shown here, and maybe we could set that tape up now, run that, and then we could come back and try and get some more of these points. It's extremely interesting, Chaim, and it's your pleasure to have the perceptions of this representative of the Neturei Karta, and I think we have that film set up now. It runs, I think, about 8 minutes or so, which is a demonstration which shows some of your fellows in the Neturei Karta in league with some of the Palestinians who were demonstrating against the state of Israel. Again, this coming from the heart of Orthodox Judaism, an extremely interesting concept. So perhaps we could set that tape up now and run it, please.
Zionism. Zionism has nothing to do with the Torah or with the Jewish people. They have stolen the holy name Israel. They have taken away Palestine from its rightful owners, the Palestinian people. We are only repeating once again that the state of Israel and the Zionist movement have absolutely nothing to do with the Jewish people. You understand that? Their crimes are crimes against the Jewish people also. They are undermining the Jewish religion. They are killing Palestinian people. They are stolen the lands from the Palestinians, and they are corrupting and destroying the Jewish religion. The Jewish people want to live in peace and harmony with the Palestinian people. We recognize fully their right to sovereignty, to independent statehood, and to full expression of self-determination.
Okay, back again. That tape is with Chaim Freimann of the Neturei Karta. It's a powerful tape, many powerful messages, many signs in there that are going to make very many people very, very angry. To say Zionism is Nazism is an extremely difficult thing, and I know, and I don't want to be personal, Chaim, but I know your family, and much of your family, I've talked with your mother, many of your family suffered in the Holocaust in Europe, no? And so it's not making light of that at all. It's just that you feel so very, very strongly this statement that's being made. Many of the people that the impetus to the establishment of Israel was the tremendous suffering, the sense of never again that came out of the Jewish community following the horror of the Holocaust in Europe. Huh?
Let me try to explain.
Yes.
Zionism is Nazism.
Yeah.
The very first thought at the very beginning of the preface to the Satmar Rebbe's magnum opus against Zionism. Now, the Satmar Rov, Zichron Livracha, Rabbi Yoel Teitelbaum, was considered the greatest Jewish leader of this past generation. He is no longer with us. He passed away some 10 years ago. He wrote a major work, a major authoritative religious work explaining the heresy and the atheism in Zionism and how it contradicts Jewish law and Jewish belief and how it is a blasphemy and an atheism. At the very beginning of his preface, his introduction to this magnum opus, this major work of his, the very first thought that he mentions is the following. And listen carefully.
I will.
In previous generations, when the Jewish people experienced a cataclysmic catastrophe, an earthquake, a volcano, an expulsion, a major persecution,
Babylonia, Egypt.
Their reaction was to examine mazos oso lakim lanu. What is this that caused God to make this happen to us? Meaning they examined themselves through introspection to detect the sin, the transgression, the iniquity, which was responsible for the process that brought about the calamity, the divine retribution. In the generation that experienced the Holocaust, it wasn't necessary to investigate very deeply into the roots of the cause of this terrible tragedy. It is very clear, he writes, that it was the sin of seeking to leave the exile against the will of God, to take things into one's own hand, to rise up against the nations of the world and conquer and take back the land of Israel, Eretz Yisroel.
Well,
the iniquity of Zionism was directly responsible for setting in motion that process which led to a creation of a Hitler and a Holocaust. And this is a reflection of the punishment mentioned in the Talmud which would occur if the Jewish people violated those three divine oaths.
Well, many people who are secularly oriented, who represent many of the best minds in the Western world, and would say that that is a classic example of blaming the victim, and that the fall of the Holocaust lay in the crazed and insane mind of Adolf Hitler and Himmler and Goebbels, and that it wasn't the fault of the Jews, it was the fault of a Gentile population that could not be trusted, and we can no longer allow ourselves to be in the thrall or in the control of these. We must be strong. We must be strong if we are to survive. And of course, that's the reaction that most of the Jewish community seems to have taken and led up to now, and would discount this view that you just offered as self-hatred and blaming the victim, for which was the fault of others. Not only the Jews have sinned, many of the Gentiles and others, and certainly Adolf Hitler was an evil man.
These criminals definitely have to be prosecuted and punished and defamed. I didn't justify them one bit. I'm just saying the reaction of Jewish people to any catastrophe has traditionally been repentance in their relationship to God. The wicked people who perpetrated the crime would definitely have to be punished, and they were punished. I mean, we saw the downfall of Germany and the Third Reich. But as regards the Jewish people who realize that everything is only through divine providence, that's the reaction of a believing Jew. In every step of his life, every thought, every movement is guided by God.
Then we must necessarily say that the people who have accepted Zionism, accepted Israel, accepted the whole process of the modern Jewish state, have done that by moving away from Jewish tradition and Jewish precept?
Unfortunately, that is so, 100%.
That's an extreme position that you represent.
The Satmar Rov mentioned this in order to convey the severity of the crime of Zionism, that we should all seek to divest ourselves of sympathy towards Israel, towards the Zionist movement, and not flow along with the tide.
How many people are there, let's say, that are of Neturei Karta? I know it's a frame of mind, it's not an organization. How many people do you think among the broader Jewish community might be among those who are of this Neturei Karta, or this view that you are representing here, would you say?
It's not a membership listing.
No, I understand. A sensing.
And I can't give you figures. There are people who outwardly realize that it's in the minority. It's a minority opinion, not accepted.
It was the majority in the 19th century. It was unanimous.
It was unanimous.
And it went from unanimous.
It went from unanimous amongst all believing, observing Jews to being considered nowadays in this century a radical, extreme position.
For being what it has always been.
For being what it has always been. These are Jewish people, regular Jewish people who have never changed, never altered, and never gravitated away from their religion, from their belief.
There are many Jewish people who make up the Jewish community who never go to shul. There are people who don't even do Seder. They are Jewish. They're secular, but they're Jewish, and they don't relate to the religious tradition, just as there are many secular Episcopalians or Protestants or Christians. And the Western world is becoming, in many cases, Europe, and so is becoming secular. Many of the modern university professors are secular. It's a secularization among the Jewish community in large, away from religious traditions, which has made it possible for this secular view to emerge, do you think?
It is not only secularizing the Jewish religion, it is undermining it entirely. It's not introducing something foreign, but it's just destroying the everything which Judaism has predicated upon. I want to stress once again that the Talmud does clearly point out that for the sin of Zionism, for doing the actions which Zionistic movement espouses, that the retribution, the divine retribution, would be genocide. This is mentioned, and that's why we're very much afraid of the consequences which will incur in the future if the Jewish people and if the world do not reject the Zionist line.
We have experienced a Holocaust, a genocidal Holocaust in Europe in the 1940s. We experienced that and so forth. There's been this shift. There's been this change, the establishment of that state, and it was done by people, and one can understand the legitimate sense of frustration at having suffered a Holocaust at the hands of the Nazis and so forth, and the ability to take control and to take and say never again, and that it's necessary for us to survive, the Jewish people to survive as a people, for them to be strong, not weak. We must be strong, and they've taken that position, right? They've established the State of Israel in order to establish the security of the Jewish people against a hostile Gentile world. In your estimation, the establishment of the State of Israel has created a more dire condition and a more difficult position for the world Jewish people than if it had not been created?
Definitely. If somebody is really interested in protecting the security and the welfare of the Jewish people, the way is not to go out and to learn karate. I mean, this is on the level of the Zionists. That's an example of how Zionist thinking is eroding.
And they've learned it very well.
Judaism.
They protect themselves by strength. No.
I mean, karate is a good idea if you want to do it for exercise, but to openly espouse that learning self-defense and becoming aggressive and to react to Gentile provocation in a way which is devoid of realizing that this sin and the iniquity which caused this to come about, this is evading the issue. This is setting up a smokescreen. This is misleading, terribly misleading.
And is threatening, in the long run, to the long-term security interests of the Jewish people, if not the people of the world.
Yeah, definitely. I mean,
in your view, right?
Jewish people are a spiritual, believing
Indeed,
people.
they have, right. You feel much of that is being eroded, the sense of social justice, what's happening to the soul of the Jewish people is being eroded by this?
The Holocaust came about because of the unparalleled defection from the Torah, the apex of assimilation, and which culminated in the Zionist movement and the acceptance by many Jewish people of its teachings.
And you now have this, and they would say there's so few Jewish people, little bit of land they want just as little land. There's a huge Arab nation that could easily take the Palestinian people, and why can't they just do that? And we've won victory after victory. They keep fighting us. We will win, and by peace through strength, we will gain our objective, and you do not think this is possible?
No. First of all,
what should be the direction in which Israel or the world would want to see events evolve as far as that part of the world is concerned?
The Jewish attitude, the attitude of Neturei Karta, which is the traditional, simple opinion, is that the Jewish people must immediately relinquish the entire land to the Palestinians. It must become a state of Palestine, not a Jewish state in the least. And the Jewish people are supposed to be loyal, patriotic, obedient citizens. Those Jews that will want to live there, want to remain there, of the state of Palestine, obeying the laws of Palestine, and being on good terms with the Palestinian Gentiles. Part of the oaths, I don't know if I mentioned this, is that the majority of the Jewish people are forbidden to live in the land of Israel before the coming of Mashiach, even under a non-Jewish state. The majority of the Jewish people are not to be concentrated in Palestine during this period of exile.
This is an incredible message of absolute antipathy to everything that is put forth in terms of the state of Israel.
That's right. They are operating in a completely opposite direction from Judaism, accelerating, expediting, and gathering the Jewish exiles, antagonizing the non-Jewish population there, with persecution and aggression and military occupation and repression. This is totally antagonistic to
propaganda efforts to dehumanize the Arab nation.
Everything, disinherit them, evict them, threaten them.
The Palestinians.
Yes, this is not the attitude of Jewish people towards the Gentiles. This is forbidden. And this is a crime of Zionism, which is transforming Judaism into a nationalistic, militaristic, chauvinistic entity.
And in your view, then, would that mean then there would be no state of Israel?
There is not to be a state of Israel, even if it would be religious, and even if the ministers of the state of Israel would truly be observant, and even if the Palestinian people would invite the Jewish people to come from all corners of the earth and set up a Jewish state, it is still forbidden.
Until
the coming of Mashiach, which will usher in a period of universal peace.
Universal peace for all.
Peace.
It must be universal peace, and Israel must come in a condition of peace and not through war.
Exactly, and through spiritual means, and there won't be opposition. The world will not be in opposition. I mean, everyone will recognize the Creator, and it will be an era of a whole different understanding.
Yeah, there would be a world fellowship and understanding, and it would be within a context of, to quote an Irish poet, or to quote James Joyce, who said, "History is a nightmare from which we're attempting to awaken." It may be that at the end of the days, or at the end of the coming of the fulfilling of the ancient prophecies, in the time of the coming of the Mashiach or the Messiah, that we come to the end of a certain closing quotes on a certain period of history when there will be issued in liberation or a world just order, and that it would be at this time then that it would be appropriate for people to think in terms of the fulfilling of these ancient prophecies, and to try and push that ahead is in your view a blasphemy in the worst possible kind of heresy.
Right. And what more, we hear reports of murders and beatings and atrocities committed against the Palestinian people. Their righteous indignation to be free and establish an independent statehood and self-determination. What more, we hear reports of this. What more, our hearts are warmed to sympathy and to demonstrate overtures of goodwill
to the Palestinian,
and to commiserate with them in their suffering.
And you do.
And that's what we do.
And there are some hundreds of thousands of people who will feel in their heart the Neturei Karta feeling among the Orthodox Jewish community.
We must advertise to the world that what the Zionists are doing is not indicative of Judaism. The Jewish people are not aggressors. They're not bad people. They're not wicked people. They're not trying to take away other people from their land, from their home. And we want to live in peaceful coexistence under a non-Jewish government, which is the way we are instructed to and the way it has been ordained.
The way it has been ordained until, again, the coming of the age of Mashiach. Which
is not a man-made process. And I want to give a little example.
Yes, please.
That when a woman is undergoing pregnancy, we understand that the process takes 9 months. If everything goes normal, then and everyone is patient, then the expectation is spontaneous, right?
Yeah.
Without man-made intervention.
Yeah.
If somebody is so short-sighted, let's say the father insists on having his child after the 4th, 5th, or 6th month,
yes,
and he goes in and he seeks to grab, to take out the child because he wants to fondle it and enjoy its existence before the proper time, he's going to commit a miscarriage and jeopardize the welfare of the mother.
Yeah, particularly if it may be that as we come to this time where we have weapons that could destroy our whole species, and technology and other kinds of addendum, it might be that this is a time when it is appropriate for the coming of the Mashiach. But these events, in your estimation, should not be before the coming of the Mashiach.
Exactly.
An incredibly interesting and thoughtful presentation, as it were, from the heart of Orthodox Judaism and so forth. I thank you very much for coming, in a certain sense, out of exile to the media to come and share these thoughts with the people in New York. I'm sorry we don't have time to talk at greater length. I look forward to doing perhaps some sort of a documentary with you people in the near-term future, and I thank you very, very much for coming in for the program tonight. Okay, thank you very much. In the cable audience, we invite you we thank you for viewing. It's been your pleasure to have the perceptions of Chaim Freimann, Neturei Karta. Happy to be able to bring you those perceptions. We'll be coming back again next week. That's it for this particular segment. Chaim, thank you very, very much indeed. Good night. We'll see you next week.